want to talk a minute about trauma. I was so excited to come on after Jamie because she was talking about the importance of a positive connection to an adult. And if anything, this talk today is going to kind of underscore the importance of that. Never underestimate the power of your connection with your students. It's crucial. I've also been really excited over the past couple of weeks with all the PDs that have been offered to see the importance of trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive education. So just as a brief review, I'm going to define trauma. Trauma is an event or series of events that threaten an individual's life or safety or the safety of someone that they love. That can be a one and done kind of event, something acute like a car accident, or it can be something that is ongoing. Or chronic. Complex trauma is more kind of the interaction of the nature of the trauma with the child's life and how they perceive it. And I think that's a really important point because trauma really does depend on very much on the person. People are very resilient. I know we hear that a lot. Kids are resilient, but it also does matter what kinds of supports that they have, what kind of experiences they have had earlier in life. But the key issue is that availability of help and support. So when there's help and support, someone can go through a difficult experience and it might not actually kind of rise to the level of trauma. These are some examples of traumatic events. I did mention car accidents, but things that are more pervasive like abuse or neglect are also traumatic events. I know that we have kids who have lived through war and other community violence. These things are also traumatic. Given that we're living through two different epidemics, those can also be perceived as traumatic, but remember, it's all about someone's perception. I know that the children that I work with who have a caregiver who is a first responder are having a much different experience right now than my students who I work with who don't have a parent who's a first responder. I'd like to talk a little bit about ACEs, and I know shout out in the screen if you've heard a little bit about this and know a little bit about this. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is just such a groundbreaking piece of scholarship. In the mid-90s, the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, the healthcare giant, identified an exposure that dramatically increases the risk for 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the United States. And here I'm actually quoting Nadine Burke-Harris because I love that specific intro because it's just such a thing that blows you away. 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the United States, they are all linked to, you guessed it, childhood trauma. So adverse childhood experiences would include things like what I showed you on the list, but this particular study looked at substance abuse in the household. It looked at abuse or neglect. It looked at having an incarcerated family member, having a household family member who had a mental illness or attempted suicide. And it's really interesting because in this particular sample, it was a sample of 13,000 adults in their 50s. So they are recollecting some of their experience. They had one in 8 of those people had 4 or more ACEs. And this is super important because if you've had 4 or more of those adverse childhood experiences, you have a considerable higher risk of depression, which might be expected, but here's the unexpected bit. You have a higher risk of heart disease, of cancer, of chronic lung disease, liver disease, skeletal fractures, and asthma. So really, one of the things that we're learning is that trauma doesn't just change one's brain, it really changes the very architecture of the brain, and it also has these important health implications. If you'd like additional information about the questionnaire itself, or if you'd like information, maybe more information about the implications of these topics, I'd like you to go ahead and take a look at those links. I also have links in the notes portion of the slideshow, which are also great. And in the notes for the slideshow, I also referenced Nadine Burke Harris's amazing book, The Deepest Well, just an astonishing and so readable description of ACEs and their impact, and her incredible work in California, now as the Surgeon General of California, to really not just mitigate the adverse childhood experiences and mitigate their effects, but also to really just flat out stop them. She's a really incredible person. It's also important to note that, I'm going to back up a minute. It's also important to note that these, the ACEs have a dose response. So the more ACEs that you have, the higher your risk for health outcomes. So while this study was done in the 1990s, there was a study done in 2020 across 14 different states, and it actually found really similar outcomes. And in fact, depression you had double the risk of depression, and again, increased risk of those other diseases that I mentioned, COPD, heart disease, et cetera. So this seems to be, I think, really important scholarship across time. All right, so racial trauma is an important piece as well to work on. Racialized trauma or race-based stress is this idea that individuals feel the effects of trauma when they're dealing with day-to-day life, being part of the non-dominant culture, living in a society where the effects of privilege, class, culture, and institutional racism still pose a large amount of control over their lives and impact them negatively. The takeaway here is that many people in our society live with traumatic experiences every single day that are systematic or institutional. That we acknowledge this and accept it is the first step to making a difference. And I'm going to move into the Philadelphia ACE study, because one of the interesting parts about the prior study, the original ACEs study, it was done on a pretty homogenous group, and there was a high percentage of people that were white, college educated, a higher socioeconomic status. So leaders in Philadelphia really wanted to look at what's the impact in a more urban environment, what's the impact in a more diverse population. So what they did was they looked at a more socioeconomic and a racially diverse population to see how the differences would shake out. Also, you can't compare them head to head because there were additional questions added. So I'm going to flip to this. Some of the additional questions that were added are here listed on the screen, because these were seen as really important pieces. Witnessing violence, feeling discrimination, having adverse neighborhood experiences, living in foster care. So with these increased questions, researchers found some interesting results that 7 in 10 had one of the ACEs, again, based on these particular questions. I think the takeaway, again, you can't compare them wholesale, but it's important to note that the impact of ACEs is higher when kids are living in poverty. And I think that for me, that's the real takeaway. And also another impact in this particular study is that white participants in this particular survey said that they experienced discrimination 15.8% of the time, whereas Black respondents responded that they had experienced discrimination 49.5% of the time. So it's a lot more pervasive of a stressor. So complex PTSD has specific responses, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the defenses that might come up. Fight, flight, and freeze are the things that I know that we hear a lot about. So when you're faced with a stressful situation, you can choose to fight, to defend yourself in that situation. You can choose to get away, to have a flight response or a fleeing response. And then the other response would be to freeze, sort of like a possum when it kind of rolls over and it plays dead. These survival of defenses can help a child in the moment or an adult in the moment, but over time, sometimes it seems that these particular responses become less effective. So when you look at different responses to trauma, you can also look at the flip side. So the healthy responses to trauma, to a fighting response, would be assertiveness and to be able to state what you need with courage. The important thing about flight would be that you disengage from a situation that you know is going to be damaging. Freezing, you can also work on yourself to find a place of peace in a stressful situation. So it's really important to note that there are ways that these can be addressed. So looking at secondary trauma, I'm going to look down for a minute here. So secondary trauma and vicarious trauma, these are terms that are kind of thrown about a bit, and they're used somewhat interchangeably. Secondary trauma or vicarious trauma is basically the emotional residue that kind of hangs on when you're exposed to the difficult stories or difficult experiences of someone that you are serving. And as helping professionals, we can all kind of get into this space. Compassion fatigue deals with a lowering of empathy. And burnout is more related to work. So when you are really exhausted with your work, when you feel less of a connection to your work, but maybe you change the task that you're working on, maybe you change your position, you change your job, that the feelings of burnout go away. The important thing to note is with secondary traumatic stress or vicarious trauma, those things really do shift your worldview. These terms can be kind of tossed about interchangeably, but what I'm really talking about here is when you take on the difficult stories of the children that you're working with or adults that you're working with, and it's hard to shake. So who is at risk for secondary trauma or vicarious trauma? So anybody who works with children. So that includes all of us. It can also be difficult if you've got a history of trauma. It can be difficult if you're a very empathetic person. And I know that teachers and mental health professionals, certainly all of the people that work in schools, have such big hearts, and that can put us at higher risk. Some of the other risk factors would be having a really high caseload or a high percentage of children who are difficult to engage or who have a high degree of trauma in their lives. Isolation, social and professional, is also a risk factor. And so that's something that I definitely want to talk about. So symptoms, how do you know if secondary trauma or vicarious traumatization is something that's having an impact on you? So if you're having excessive fear or worry about something that you fear might happen, that's a sign. Having thoughts that kind of come into your head that are related to the traumatic stories that you've heard kids share might come into your mind, and you might not be able to shake those. Having fear in situations that other people don't really find disturbing can be another sign. If you're jumpy, easily startled, that can be a sign. When you get that feeling that you're a little bit removed from your students, you're detached, if you're feeling really angry or cynical, if hopelessness is something that you really can't shake, if your concentration is reduced significantly and your ability to make decisions is hampered, maybe you're struggling with decisiveness. Physical symptoms can also be something that you experience as well. So when your heart races, you've got shortness of breath, tension headaches or fatigue, or just chronically tight muscles that don't shift or change. Lifestyle changes can also be a sign that you might need some additional support. Difficulty sleeping, if you're over or under eating, if you find that you're self-medicating with drugs or alcohol. one glass of something might not be a problem for you, but if you notice that you're drinking to excess or drinking multiple drinks every night, it might be a sign that you need some extra support. So self-care is even more crucial for teachers. So teachers in the audience, this is for you. Teacher morale strongly correlates with student achievement. And I know a lot of people say this adage as it relates to households: ain't nobody happy if mama ain't happy. I don't know if y'all have heard that, but it's certainly something that I've heard on more than one occasion. And teachers' emotional states definitely affect the classroom, just like a parent's emotional state affects the home. Burnout is the leading reason that teachers leave the profession, and I know that's also actually quite high for therapists as well. Teachers and nurses rate at a tie for burnout, closely followed by doctors. Some of the symptoms of burnout would be stress, emotional exhaustion, a lack of care or reduced care in your students, and high stress, as we talked about in the ACEs study. High stress or chronic stress definitely puts you at higher risk for physical health concerns. So some studies have implicated numbers as high as 75% of physical health problems being related to high stress in teachers. But that study actually was done in the United Kingdom, so I don't know how valid that is for us here in the United States, but that's a pretty high number. All right, so secondary trauma, what might that look like? Intrusion, that's when someone who has experienced trauma vicariously re-experiences it. So if a child has told you a difficult story, you re-experience it again and again, or maybe you see that child, the bruises on a child's arm, you see it again and again. You might have nightmares. Triggers would be there's something in your environment that leads you to a thought of that experience. So maybe if you notice you have a bruise on your arm, it reminds you of the child that had bruises up and down their arms and legs. That would be an example of a trigger. Avoidance would be when you kind of turn away. So if there's a trigger or an emotion that is really uncomfortable, you turn away from it. You try to avoid it, either through numbing of your emotions or through just detaching from a situation. That can also involve drugs and alcohol. Hyperarousal would be when you're always on the edge, kind of walking on eggshells. You can't concentrate. You're really quick to answer. You're doing too many things at once. So that's an example of hyperarousal. So these are some of the symptoms that you might experience. So I think it's important to kind of see them broken down. So healthy stress looks like the column on the left, and overstress looks like the column on the right. For those of you that are listening on a phone, maybe you're not able to see the slide, I'm going to go ahead and go through some of them. Signs of healthy stress include things like good concentration, clarity and confidence in your decision making, really clear in your thinking, effectively solving problems, planning, having long-term planning that feels effective, feeling concern and care for others, feeling cheerful, overall positive and enthusiastic, feeling a cooperativeness with colleagues, being able to give and accept constructive criticism. Potential impact of overstress would be, again, the things on the right-hand side. That would be a change in your activity level. So maybe heightened activity, maybe you're over-exercising, or maybe you just can't exercise at all. Increase in eating foods for pleasure, so fatty or sugary foods, increase in alcohol consumption or tobacco use. Irritability or emotional outbursts, just kind of losing it, having kind of a little bit of a tantrum, being unable to relax, being unable to unwind, just that feeling of being tense and not able to really let it go. Worrying that your job performance is poor, crying, worrying, feeling angry frequently, having headaches, stomach aches, or tension, difficulty with memory or decision making, isolating, so distancing yourself from friends or family members, or not engaging in activities that previously you found pleasure in. So I think it's also important, while I know that that sounds like a whole lot of bad news, there's also the impact that trauma can have on you. It's actually called post-traumatic growth in the literature. Compassion satisfaction is another phrase that you can hear. But it's that idea that you get fulfillment and growth from these experiences when you work with with a student who has a difficult situation, and maybe you're able to find a greater source of meaning in that, a greater source of hope and strength and resilience. Maybe you're able to connect that child with increased services, and this gives you an increase in the way that you feel about yourself, this sense of efficacy. It can also impact your gratitude for maybe your own upbringing, or for the students that you work with. You can notice that maybe a student who's gone through a really difficult life experience. I know this is true for me. Working with kids who have survived trauma gives me such a profound respect for my clients and for their families, just that they have survived something that is so difficult, and that they can still find joy and delight, and can be resourceful and helpful. There's just so much power in that resilience of the human spirit. It really does bring me personally a great amount of joy. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention the importance of self-care. So yeah, when we work with kids and families who have experienced difficult things, self-care is really important. And again, I want to emphasize that these are not the best of circumstances. We're living through a really difficult time right now. So even in the best of circumstances, these things that I mentioned previously would be true. But right now, this is all the more important. When you have a window into your students' homes, you do have an eye on maybe things that might be disturbing. So definitely take a look at your self-care practice. So in this slideshow, I've linked a self-care inventory. So this is something that I really invite you to go ahead and do. It's very simple. It only takes maybe 5 to 7 minutes. And personally, before I presented to you all last week, actually, I took it myself just to kind of look and see where I am. And as a therapist, I do this for a living. I've gone to school and done a lot of work about the importance of self-care, and yet it's hard to remember, in times where you're feeling stressed, you're feeling pressured. So I think it's really a nice reminder that we all need to consider self-care, and that we really do need to make a concerted effort to put it in our calendars, and maybe even have a self-care accountability partner. So if you will, go ahead and consider which of these practices are you doing regularly, and which ones are you interested in trying. So I'm going to go ahead and flip to some of these examples. So you're welcome to go to the link and check that out now, or you're also welcome to just go ahead and look at or listen to these slides. So physical self-care is that care of the body. So that includes, wearing clothes that your body feels good in, getting lots of good sleep, quality sleep, having time for exercise, taking the time to move, maybe to take breaks, to eat well, to take deep breaths, getting proper medical care, and that might include certainly includes regular checkups, but it might include something like a massage or something else. Taking vacations away from work. Now, I realize for most of us, that's probably going to be a staycation, but on the weekend and during your breaks from work, really walking away from the computer and finding space where you really are taking a break away from things. Taking care of your body is an essential part of self-care. Also, taking care of your emotions, really looking at one of the key factors in resilience is really taking care of those relationships, both reaching out to people at work, but also reaching out not just to colleagues, but also to people in your personal support circle. So that might be family members, it might be friends, it could be people in your spiritual community, it could be neighbors. So really taking care to nourish and nurture those relationships actually benefits you emotionally. Some other wonderful tips would be journaling. You can write or draw whatever you see, however you see fit, just to kind of get those feelings down and out of your body. Doing things that bring you joy, whatever that might be. It could be something as simple as blowing bubbles or playing a game with your own children. Or it could be, doing something fun with a friend, even at a distance. Really I know right now, we all have to make a concerted effort to meet up with friends and family members because we can't really do that in person as much due to um, contagion concerns. So really make that a priority in your life, because that benefits you, and in turn that benefits your students. Psychological self-care, certainly a lot of those emotional things that I just talked about also add to this, but taking that time to reflect both on your teaching practice, but also on how you're feeling, how you're doing, what you're thinking. Are you thinking thoughts that are helping you, or are you thinking thoughts that are kind of getting in your way? That positive self-talk is going to go a long way as we all reach out and learn new things. All of the new technological parts of our way that we're reaching out to kids, they're really exciting, but they can be stressful. So just talking to yourself and saying, you know what, I will keep working. I can ask for help. Things like that. Tell yourself kind things. Taking time in nature, walking away from the computer, engaging in hobbies, allowing receiving from others. So when others are able to be present to you, so that they can, when they listen to you, when they want to make dinner for you or do something like that, those are things that you definitely say yes to. Say yes to other people helping. Therapy is a great resource, especially if you're feeling a high degree of stress. Our employee assistance program through JCPS is an incredible resource. And I know that the governor has also made therapeutic services free to everyone during the pandemic. So because we work for the state, we do have an incredible perk, at least at this time. So I would really urge you to go ahead and look at the resources that are available to you if you're feeling a high degree of stress. Meditation and mindfulness are also wonderful things for psychological self-care. And if you're interested in those, I know that Compassionate Schools Project offers some really great professional development opportunities. And I know that Terry Kendall, shameless self-promotion for the mental health practitioners, that's a great resource that Terry offers. So, and anyone would be welcome to attend those. So take a look at those on PD Central. They are really wonderful tools to help you to feel calmer and in the moment. Spiritual self-care, regardless of your belief system, is also super important. So being open to something that is bigger than you. That could be nature, it could be something religious or spiritual in nature, whatever that might be for you. Some ways of connecting with spiritual self-care are listed. That might be meditation or prayer or simply reflection. Expressing and feeling gratitude is something that's so crucial. It's great not just for your relationships, but it's actually, research indicates it's actually good for you as well. There are health benefits to gratitude. Gratitude increases resiliency and has positive impacts on health overall. Listening to inspiring music, taking time for silence and solitude in this busy, noisy world that we live in, taking time to really look at things like optimism and hope are super important right now when there is so much difficulty. having compassion towards ourselves and towards others right now and in the future. These are all really amazing things. Yoga and Tai Chi are great resources, and I know locally we have a lot of resources for yoga and Tai Chi. The Interfaith Paths to Peace offers a lot of free things during the lunchtime break if you're interested. Professional self-care is another crucial part of looking at vicarious trauma. You really want to pay attention. Yeah.
I hate to interrupt you. We're a little bit past 2:30, and Shannon and Ronzell are here for our next presentation.
Okay.
I'll give you like another minute if you can.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Wow. Okay, so we reduced this presentation, so I can see I need to maybe reduce it a bit more if we're going to fit the 30-minute time block. Professional self-care is crucial. Really upping your game professionally and finding that support when you're having a rough day, reaching out for help with your colleagues and coworkers, super, super important. There are other resources that are attached in this document. And I would be very, very thrilled if you wanted to reach out to me. My email is also listed. It's jennifer.beasley3@jefferson.kyschools.us. Happy to help. And thank you so much for your attention today.